Are you taking too much risk in your investment portfolio? And for this, we need to bust out the PVC pipe of knowledge. And you know it's the authentic PVC pipe of knowledge because we have the green duct tape. All right. Have my man Dennis brought me a PVC pipe of knowledge to my seminar I did in Cleveland, which is much appreciated, but it wasn't the original. It wasn't the original. All right. It's a fake news. All right. Anyway, but that was fantastic. I very much love that. We all had a good joke of that. All right, so working. Let's go with this. What we're talking about. I did talk about this in a seminar that I did the other day, and it was a lot of fun. So we got three bell curves, all right. And what we're going to show you here is we got this first bell curve as a expected rate of return of 6% with a standard deviation of 17. This second bell curve has a rate of return expected of 5.4 with a standard deviation, we'll just say 13. This third bell curve has a 5% expected rate of return with a standard deviation of 10. All right, so what this means here is these are numbers that I create, and I created with not just pulling them out of my butt, but I use the Vanguard models and stuff like that based on some historical knowledge of volatility. What standard deviation is simply the volatility around a mean. That's it. So we got a mean, and they square root the variance. I can't remember how that does from a statistical perspective, but generally speaking, we have an average rate of return, a mean, but it's not. We don't always get 12%, a la David Ramsey. We get 25, we get negative 12, all this stuff. So it's a variation around the mean. That's all it means. No one really cares about the upside standard deviation, the positive. Everyone's really they care about the downside risk. That would be your value at risk, what's called the VAR. Either way, though, standard deviation is if you have within a certain statistical probability, given the numbers that you put in there, you would say we would expect a 99.8% probability that your portfolio would be no more than a certain amount of money on the upside and no less than a certain amount of percentage down on the downside, within 99.8% within 3 standard deviations. So 3 standard deviations with these numbers that we created, we would say your portfolio should fall within these 2, negative and positive. All right, so on the high end, a 6% rate of return, we say 17 is our standard deviation, times that by 3 equals 51, plus minus 6. So we expect on this long bell curve, we get no more than a 57% on the upside and no less or no greater than a 45% on the down. So this would be negative 45. This would be 57 over here, if you can see that barely. So I change over there, all right? Positive 57, negative 45. That's what we say here. On this is 100% stocks. This is a 70-30 right here, this guy. 13% is our standard deviation. And we have what, 5.4. So that's 39 plus minus 5.4. So we'd expect it no more than, well, we'll just say 44 for simplicity. And we'll say 34. Yeah, 34. So we expect it to be no more than 34 on this side and 44 on that side within 99.8% of the time. All right, then we have the third one is a 50-50. And we say we expect a 10% standard deviation, 30 plus or minus 5, which is our expected rate of return. So 35 and 25. All right, so we expect this to get no worse than a 25% negative portfolio return, but no greater than a 35. Now for me, because I'm still plugging money in, I don't really care. I'm plugging. In fact, the lower the returns, the more my future returns would be. So I'd love it to have a 45% downside. We've never actually had that, by the way. And in 1931, I think, we had a 44% downside. But when you factor in a 10% deflation, 2008 was actually a worse return than 1931 because there's no deflation at all in 2008 to speak of, where in 1931 there's a 10% deflation. So even though we had a 44% loss, net of inflation, 2008 was worse than 1931. Just keep that in mind. In 2008, we were down 37%. So we've never had a 45% loss at all. And does that mean we can't? No, I don't know. But what I'm saying is I've talked to these guys today. They're a 70-30 portfolio. And so I said, look, on any given year, we're running these numbers in Monte Carlo, running thousands of different iterations. So in any given year, you could expect I think it's 34% decline. And when we're running the Monte Carlo scenario, it shows you, hey, you got an 85% probability of success, which assumes that you could hit a 34% decline. Is that acceptable? What if we went to a 50-50 and you only had a 25% decline? What does that do? It makes the probability of success more because we're reducing our risk, in this case from 45 all the way down to 25. Basically, we're reducing our risk by half, but we're only reducing our rate of return from 6 to 5. So if you have a heavily stock-oriented portfolio, yeah, you had a higher expected rate of return, but in this case, only 100 basis points higher expected rate of return, but literally 20% decline, less than the decline here. You see what I'm saying? So you're taking off some downside risk and actually improves your probability of success in a lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of times it does. Are we taking on too much risk? By the way, what does Monte Carlo not tell you either? Monte Carlo, I'll go over here. If we have a 45% loss or a 25% loss, doesn't matter. If we're down 45% in year 1, does Monte Carlo recognize that in year 2? No. Monte Carlo says we're going to get another number, which could also be down 45%. Because we're saying you can be down 45% with a 99.8% probability of success. Doesn't mean it's just a one-time deal. Once you're down 45%, you'll never be down that again. Monte Carlo says every single year is unique from the last. But that's not how markets work. Markets are very, they understand what happened in the past. They're very trend-oriented, momentum and whatnot. So if we're down 45% and you're Monte Carlo and it's showing you only a 77% probability because you're like, man, that 45% killed me. Yeah, and Monte Carlo doesn't realize this is not going to happen again. I mean, just look at the history. 1973, 74, all right? And then 1975. 1929, 30, 31, 32, 1933. Did any of these things happen? 2008, 37% was what we're down. What happened in 2009? It was up. 2007, what happened? It was up. I mean, see how these things work? 1994, 1999 in the bond market, same thing. 2022 in the bond market. The bond market actually 2021 and 2022 were down. So that was a unique bond market in that regard. I think the BND was down in 2021. But anyway, these things don't operate in a vacuum. All right, these things are completely reliant on previous numbers for sure, because previous numbers show future expectations, and markets are based on future expectations. Anyway, so this is how the Monte Carlo works with these probability of successes. They're not independent. They're completely independent of each other, which is, you can't. And what do you got to do, man? Monte Carlo is the best thing we got. I got no problem with it. But then you just have standard deviations work. We're like, okay, we could get a 57% rate of return, but we could also get a 45% loss. Is that worth it? And if I'm retired, I'm like, hell no, it's not worth it. I'll sacrifice a 57% rate of return for a 35% rate of return to avoid a 45% loss instead of only having 25. Anyway, so that's the question you got to ask yourself. Are you taking too much risk relative to what you could get in a less risky portfolio? Are we sacrificing a lot of return right here? Are we shooting for a lot of return, but yet we're risking a whole lot more on the downside? And if we are, that might be something we want to think about, especially if you're about ready to retire. Love your thoughts. Don't forget to fondle the like button. All right, God bless. We'll see you.